So, good evening, everyone. It's 7 p.m. here in Warsaw, Poland. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. I'm here with Dustin Quick, and today we're going to have a discussion on Islam, his history, Catholicism, and just all things Catholicism, including Calvinism. So, you've had quite a journey. So, thanks, Dustin, for coming on, and perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lloyd. It's an honor, pleasure, and blessing to be here with you today. It's 1 p.m. my time, so we were able to work the scheduling out, which is great. We're very grateful for that. So, yeah, a little bit about myself. I am the host of Holy Smokes, Cigars, Catholicism, and Conversation. Started my podcast back in, I want to say, 2020. And the kind of impetus for it was not just another apologetics channel. I'm granted, apologetics are great, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to show the connections between the first temple in Jerusalem and the Catholic Church being its fulfillment and full flowering. So that was sort of how I got started. And then I just had several interviews on there over the years. I had like Jimmy Akin, Tim Staples, Matt Fradd, people like that, Rachel Fulton Brown, Michael Lofton, just a slew of guests. And I'm very grateful and blessed for that opportunity. And so I'm technically a revert to the Catholic Church. I was baptized as a baby in the Catholic faith. I'm not going to go too far ahead. I'm just going to do a brief snapshot because I don't want to take away from our the meat of our discussion right at this time, of course. But baptized as a baby in the Catholic Church. Grew up Protestant, converted to Islam in university with the help of the Black Hebrew Israelites and Nation of Islam, which is going to be a fun topic to go over. And then I had a life-changing encounter with Jesus Christ while I was still a Muslim, not ready to let go of Islam yet. So I kind of combined the two religions and made like a Christocentric version of Islam. Finally, I shed that skin once I realized that wasn't tenable. Went to Protestant roots again, but specifically Calvinism. And then finally, through a study of the early church and much prayer and discernment, I came full circle to the church of my baptism, the Catholic Church. So I've been Catholic since 2014 is when I made an act of faith. 2015, I was formally received. So that's my little bio.
It's quite a journey. That is quite an interesting journey, and obviously a lot of learning along the way, a lot of stumbles, a lot of falls, picking yourself up. Obviously, so for the audience, if you have questions, please drop those in the chat. We'll be happy to address those. Of the guests that you've had on, can I ask you which have been your favorites? Whom have you learned the most from?
That's a great question, Lloyd. I have had so many. Well, for those who don't know, I have an interest in temple theology, and that as a discipline of study was really coined and spearheaded by Margaret Barker, who's a retired Methodist preacher in the UK. And she shows how Christianity, early Christianity, not Protestantism, but early Christianity, apostolic Christianity, made so much sense because it was a return to the theology and cultus of the first temple. So everything from like the bread of the presence, the menorah, the figure of the Lady Wisdom, the Davidic Melchizedek priest king being Emmanuel, God with his people as his representative or cult statue on earth. This is why everything made so much sense to the early Christians. So early, we see Marian devotion develop so quickly. We see incarnational theology. We see the Trinity, because the God of Israel had multiple hypostases. He appeared as a human being in both vision and flesh in the Old Testament, and part of his nature could not be seen, but he was also seen visibly and interacted with. And so this idea of, the Israelite religion or biblical religion being somewhat akin to Islam, where God is a solitary monad, and he can't be seen or interacted with or compared with anything in the absolute
On that
sense.
point, if I can maybe interject there for a moment, there's something that I need to research. I have the notes, I have the preparatory notes for this, so I can dive deeper. But when you go into some of the extra biblical sources of these Jews, you start to find that they do refer to God as a multitude, as at least as a complex unity. Let's call it that.
Sure.
So you do find references to God as a Trinity, to God. I'm not referring here to the council of the spirits or the council of heaven,
Right.
but you do find references to God as that. And there were also within different strands within Phariseeism, there were different groups. Like you had the house of Hillel and Shammai, and I'm
Hmm.
always confusing the two. But one of them certainly had a more, shall we say, Christian-leaning view of God, which was compatible. And at one point, one of the groups won out and basically effectively crushed and dissolved the other perspective.
Mm.
So that disappeared. And in fact, and some of that is due to the rise of Christianity, where there was this negative reaction to it. And this theology of God being a complex unity was eventually not just abandoned, but really crushed and completely scrubbed.
Yeah, with rabbinic Judaism, really, we find that development because, largely it was it was a reaction to Christianity. Even the
Yeah.
canon of the Palestinian Jews, not preferring the Septuagint or the books therein for the most part, was a reaction to Christianity and Christian claims because we were using, the so-called Apocrypha to elucidate messianic prophecies and things like that. So that obviously wouldn't fly, and so they
Mhm.
shortened the canon. So that's another little tidbit of information that I learned along the way. But you're absolutely correct. And for anybody who's interested in God as a complex unity, you can look at the work of people like Stephen Siegel, I want to say is his name. Two Powers in Heaven is a good book.
Yep. Yeah.
You would want to look at Margaret Barker. She's got a book called The Great Angel, A Study of Israel's Second God, which was instrumental in my conversion. And there's one more that I'm thinking of. Can't really. Oh, Benjamin Summer. Anything by Benjamin Summer, you might want to take a look at that.
So that would be great if you emailed me those afterwards, because that would be interesting for me to have a look at as well, that I could add to my list when I start doing my research on that particular history.
Yeah, I think you'll. I don't know if you're familiar with Margaret Barker Lloyd, but she would definitely enjoy her work. I mean, some of the conclusions and specifics I don't agree with, but her work is so interesting because although she's a daughter of the Reformation, as she describes herself, she's very critical of sola scriptura, Protestant ideas. She bears witness, and she has no dog in the fight. So she's not trying to prove Catholicism or Orthodoxy, but her work bears witness to the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the Melchizedek priesthood of
Mhm.
the apostolic churches, Marian devotion, and so on and so forth. So her work is very valuable. So if you want to kind of show maybe somebody who doesn't want a Catholic biased author and just wants, history, so to say, as it is, you can
Mhm.
point them to her work, and she's very kind of
Yeah.
impartial in that respect. And so I think
Well, I think people have seen on my channel, I don't particularly, I mean, I try to provide a range of perspectives. I might have my own perspective and conclusions, but I do provide a range of works from Catholic and non-Catholic authors. So I
sure,
do try to provide both sides of the argument and then provide my reasons for my conclusions. I
right.
mean, another Protestant scholar that I really like is Michael Heiser. He
Mhm.
also tackles some very difficult questions, but his work is fantastic.
Yeah, he does great stuff on the Divine Council. Is he passed away?
Yes, he sadly died at, I believe, 60 or 62, died very young a couple of years
Yeah,
ago.
I think
Very
he had
sad event.
cancer, right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
God
So
rest
that
his
was very
soul.
unfortunate. But I mean,
Yeah.
he was still a very active mind. He could have made great contributions. So there's a question from CMB. What do you think of the Didache, Dustin? And in fact, that kind of is part of how you found out about me, right?
That's right. You were doing a stream with Sam on the Didache, and I just found your insights and your slides, your presentation was it just reeled me in. It hooked me. I was outside smoking a cigar, and I said, "Let me click on this," and I did, and I enjoyed my cigar even more because of that stream. So I got to check out this brother's channel, and I've been checking out your videos and enjoy every one of them. Great content. So definitely got a subscription from me.
Appreciate it.
So
Thank you, man.
yeah, no
Yeah.
problem.
Although
The
you somehow have access to all of these really great minds that you bring on your channel.
Well, yeah, I mean, just recently, in fact, I believe it was this past Wednesday, I had Connie Marshner on. She is the wife of the Catholic scholar William Marshner, and she just released a book from Sophia Institute Press called Monastery and High Cross. I don't have the book in front of me. The subtitle is The Forgotten Eastern Roots of Irish Christianity, I believe. So
Mhm.
I just had her on this past Wednesday, and her thesis, which is very supported by evidence, not theory, is that St. Patrick, while he can be, rightly credited with the conversion of Ireland, Egyptian monks got to Ireland first, and they influenced everything from the discipline of spiritual fatherhood, confession, private confession, the liturgy, papyrus books with palm trees, all the stuff that, these beehive huts. The only other place you would find them in Ireland would be
Mhm.
the Egyptian desert. So all these things converge together. And you asked me, who did I learn the most from? This kind of information was brand new to me. I always assumed Irish Catholicism was just sort of developed in the West, right? But it actually came from the
Right.
East and brought its own flavor. And then, had more of a Roman influence with St. Patrick and the arrival of Latin and everything. But yes, really interesting stuff. So if anyone wants to check that out, that's the latest video on my channel with Connie Marshner.
Okay. Yep. What did you take away from the Didache discussion?
Well, first and foremost, I think what's important to realize is the dating of the document. It's so early. It's
Yep.
It's contemporaneous with parts of the New Testament, and even older than parts of the New Testament.
Yep.
And really, it's the first glimpse into a manual or a rule of faith pertaining to liturgy, the baptismal formula, the practice of confession, the Eucharist as a sacrifice, confessing
Yep.
before you receive the Eucharist as a sacrifice, not just a meal, and definitely not symbolic. And the Eucharist as the fulfillment of Malachi 1:11, where God says, my name will be great among the nations, from the rising of the sun to the settings, because a pure sacrifice will be offered by the nations, i.e. the Gentiles, which is the fulfillment of what we see in prophecies of Isaiah, where God says, those who are not priests, I will call priests, and so on, with the Davidic covenant. So,
Right.
yeah, very interesting stuff in the Didache, and just a glimpse into early Christianity, and
Yeah.
it definitely wasn't Protestantism.
No, I think it also gives, well, it does certainly have a very strong, undeniable Catholic flavor to it, but also it also gives you an insight into the fact that prior to the wide availability of actual gospel manuscripts, there clearly was an oral tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and also it heavily uses the Deuterocanon.
Right. Yeah, very true. Yes,
So,
and there's a dispute on the dating. Some put it in the 2nd century, but I say the biggest giveaway for it being a 1st century document is the mention of prophets, because in the 2nd century, with Ignatius of Antioch and Irenaeus of Lyon, we don't get that kind of mention of people in the church functioning as
yeah.
apostles and prophets anymore, right? That's really the New Testament language.
Yeah, although new scholarship tends to push biblical documents earlier and earlier, as well as the Didache is just earlier and earlier.
Right.
So a lot of scholarship is now showing that the Bible is actually earlier. And in fact, I do follow, I subscribe to the biblical archaeology um, subscription. Well, I have a subscription to biblical archaeology online or whatever they're called.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about $33 a year or something, but really well worth it. And the archaeology is really starting to show the validity of the stories of the Bible. Now, you can still debate whether these are, whether these were religiously the same as well, if these were sort of miracles and those things happened, but certainly the history is showing that it is legitimate based on just archaeology and hard evidence,
Mm-hmm.
because new archaeology is uncovering facts that support the Old and New Testament more and more.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like that would be a great investment. You say $30-something per month?
Yeah, I think it's about 33. There's 4 issues a year. They've
Mm.
got a fantastic website with a great archive of articles. Now, not all of these contributors are necessarily Christians. Many of them are secular. Many of them are Bart Ehrman. Need I
Right.
say more?
Right.
However, Bart Ehrman draws some terrible conclusions from some really good facts.
Mm.
So, there is that. And Bart Ehrman says, okay, well, we're going to ignore these 100 facts on the for side of the argument. And I've got these 5 little facts that I'm going to focus on this as the brunt of my argument and go, well, I actually think it was really just an early form of Mickey Mouse comics based on these 5 things. I'll ignore the other 20 times more evidence that goes in the other direction.
Of course.
That's Bart Ehrman,
Right.
as we know and love him. Yeah. So welcome everyone. I see where the numbers are picking up. That's one of my strongest convictions of the stories of the Bible, which is the archaeology. That's from Luke. Yes, that me too.
Mm.
This is why I follow the website. It's hold on. Let me just get them up. Let me just get them up. It's here we go. Just bring this up. Share my screen quickly. No, it's this one. Actually, no, I'll do this and I'll just share. Let me just share my screen.
Hmm.
Here it is. The Biblical Archaeology Society. Sorry, that's it.
Okay.
The Biblical Archaeology Society, and they have a library. Um, so this is them, the Bass Library since '75, and they are excellent. They've got great videos, some fantastic lectures, books, magazines. They do 4 issues a year, and also they have hundreds of articles. And these are some of the best research you'll see. Now, clearly, there's some bias. That
Sure.
is true. However, you are going to find some real gold there as well. So it's $2.93 a month, billed annually. And if you pick the digital subscription, you can get a print subscription in the US, $35. Okay, it goes up every year. So,
Mm.
but I've been subscribing for a couple of years now. It's well worth it. So I'll
Yeah,
just zoom
sounds great.
into. It's well worth it. The just the
Hmm.
access to their articles, the photographs, there's some really good stuff here, and there's always new findings, which is great.
That sounds awesome.
So,
Thanks for showing that
so
to me.
yeah, no, it's one of the resources that I use. They've got an app for your phone. Oh, they've even got Canadian pricing because, as you know, there are three genders: men, women, and Canadians.
Yeah, and I'm the latter. So
Well, there you go. Right. Yeah. Let me just. Um, so I'm going to ask you one or two questions. So you were discussing your history, which is really complex, and I think you've learned a great deal. I think it's given you a lot of perspective. I think it's given you a great education. So tell us a bit more about your journey from Islam. And I mean, I would say that the Nation of Islam and the fake Hebrew Israelites, as I typically call them,
mm,
that's not authentic Islam.
no.
And and then how you moved to Calvinism and how you eventually, what was it? What was the conviction that told you, look, this is not Christianity. This is not necessarily faithful to the Bible. What took you back to Catholicism, to that evil Catholic Church with the demoniac
Yeah.
Antichrist, as
Right.
we hear it every day.
Yeah. There's that's just beating a dead horse for sure, if I've ever seen that happen. um so yeah, a bit about my journey then. If anyone's interested too, I've also been on the journey home on EWTN. You can just type in my name, type in journey home, you could find my
It's an
testimony there.
excellent interview.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. That was on the bucket list to get on that show. I tried for 7 years and I was tenacious and I kept knocking on the door and they finally let me in. So definitely something I'll always remember and treasure. But yeah, so basically, I'll give you the fuller version now that you've asked me that question. So, like I said, I was baptized as an infant in the Catholic Church. Grew up Protestant, and my faith life growing up. Yeah, there it is. My faith life growing up was pretty nominal. If you would have asked me, is Jesus your Lord and Savior? Of course, I would have said yes. But I didn't have a personal relationship. I didn't really have a walk with Christ. But I mean, when you're younger, that's kind of common, right? Living in North America or whatever secular society, you just follow the crowd and you follow your desires. But I was Christian in name and culturally so, and that's my family background. On my dad's side, he was a pastor's kid. His dad was a pastor, and his wife, my grandma, who is still with us today, she helped him in the ministry field, and they were, uh, I think you would classify them as Pentecostal if I had to box them in somewhere. So I definitely had a big Christian influence growing up, but it didn't really rub off on me as I got older. The whole teenage rebellion thing and all
Hmm.
of that, right? So I got into hip hop music, and I heard this one song, "Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth," by Killa Priest is the um, the artist name, affiliate of the Wu-Tang Clan for anybody who's interested. And that's where I found the Black Hebrew Israelites. The idea that Christianity, the white Jesus, is the white man's religion. It's a lie. They're hiding the identity of the true Christ, the true Black Messiah, and the true children of Israel, the lost tribe of Judah, is the Black man and woman in North America. Other tribes like Gad are the Native Americans, and other tribes are Latina and Latinos, and they're all one big family. They're all Israelites, and the white man is the odd man out. Of course, he's the cursed seed of Edom. So I started listening to stuff like this and reading stuff like this online, and I stopped eating pork. I started reading more about the Old Testament, and I saw myself as being chosen, put on some kind of mission, because I'm a white kid, but I'm falling into this knowledge, and I feel like I'm privileged to have it, because somebody else in my position would reject it outright. But here I am, tasked with this mission. I've been imbued with this knowledge. I have to shout it from the rooftops and share it. So every chance I got on university campuses, I would tell people about the lie about the white Jesus and all of this stuff, right? So that's how my spiritual
Why does
journey
that
got
sound
started.
vaguely Gnostic?
It's purely Gnostic, because if you have knowledge, the right knowledge, you will be saved, right? And that's what I had. I thought I had anyway, was the right knowledge. So very Gnostic, and very prideful. Like I felt like I was some kind of chosen individual, felt like one of the elect. So there's sort of an echo of Calvinism there. Yeah, indeed. So that's how my journey got started, was hip hop music and the Black Hebrew Israelites. How I would have seen Jesus at the time. Well, the Trinity was an invention of the white man and Christianity, and the Catholic Church in particular, which I would have rejected that terminology. But I think I saw Jesus still as divine in some loose or vague sense, and I really couldn't define it. I wouldn't have defined it. I just said he, died on the cross for our sins, but that was about it. But I was more interested than, I think now looking back, I was more interested in his complexion than his saving work and his redemptive work. And
That's interesting.
Yeah, that really threw me for a loop there for a while. And it didn't stop there. It just gets more interesting. So I was online on this website, this Nation of Islam website. I'm not sure how I found it. I think it was the result of the war, when America went to Iraq. I had this vision of Islam, that the Allah of the Quran is the Satan of the Bible. So I wanted nothing to do with Islam. Muslims are evil, this and that. So I wanted to sort of see if I could back up that claim. So I think that's how I stumbled on this website. But it was the Nation of Islam, of all things, which is not Orthodox Islam by any stretch. But nonetheless, I listened to this lecture by Warith Muhammad, who was Elijah Muhammad's son, and Malcolm X, on the meaning of the word Islam and the true religion and the original man. So it all kind of goes together. Islam is simply the Arabic word for submission or surrender. One of the roots is silm, or peace. So if you submit to your creator, you have peace. This is the original religion of the original people, who of course are dark-skinned, not whites, or not light complected. So the black man's religion is the original religion. It's even the religion of the universe, because if you take mankind out of the universe, you still have atoms, you still have energy, you still have trees, rocks. They all submit to their creator. So the universe is a Muslim. The religion of the universe is Islam.
And space is black, so therefore,
yeah. Well, that's how they view the self manifestation of God. Is he builds a body for himself from an atom in the triple darkness of space, and from that one single atom builds a body of light, and then it's too deadly for creation to bear. So he wraps that body of light in the blackness of space from which he came, and hence they call him the self-created God. This is the originator, the black man, and he puts his spirit into Adam, and Adam is now God incarnate, God on earth. There's no God above, there's no God in the sky, no mystery, no spook God is what they say. And so the black man is literally God, and the white man is a laboratory creation, and he is the devil. So it kind of
That is
built
a
up.
very strange line of argument for them to take.
It,
Wow.
it is. So I kind of fell into that. Now the problem was I didn't see their savior Farad Muhammad as the Messiah. I still saw Jesus as the Messiah.
Who met
Uh,
Elijah Muhammad?
Elijah Muhammad was the one chosen by Farad Muhammad, who was supposed
Oh,
to
okay.
be Allah in person, who comes to Detroit in 1930,
Yeah.
chooses
He
Elijah
was,
Muhammad as his
yeah,
prophet.
Elijah Muhammad was a Shriner as well, which is a superset of the Freemasons. And they're a, if you've watched my talk with Sam Shamoon on that topic, where I went through the Muslim connections to the Freemasons and the Shriners. So every Shriner is a Freemason. Not every Freemason becomes a Shriner, but every Shriner
Right.
was a Freemason or is a Freemason. And Elijah Muhammad was one. And these are effectively a Muslim Freemason group, and they claim to be the original Freemasons. The that Freemasonry is a poor shadow or reflection of the original Muslim Freemasonry, and they claim that they give allegiance to Allah, they give allegiance to Ali. It's fully Muslim. It's a really the whole thing is Muslim. It's a little bit like cosplay, I guess. Some people have claimed it
Uh,
is, but really, and all of their imagery, all of their oaths and things are to Allah, and so that's which is a really strange swerve, a very
sure,
strange
sure.
left field sort of move for them to make. Um, by the way, you just mentioned something. Um, oh, hold on, that. Yeah, so you mentioned Jesus was just to bring up a point. Jesus
Uh-huh.
was a Muslim. He was also Serapis. He was also Mithras, Attis, and Dionysus, and who I assume were all Muslims. Jesus was also Zoroastrian. Jesus was also a Roman. He was Ra. He was an Egyptian. He was also Palestinian. He was also the son of a Roman soldier, and he was a Buddhist. And Jesus also didn't exist while also being a Gnostic.
The more you know.
These are all claims about Jesus. So,
I
I mean,
know.
all of them, logic would dictate that all of these are 100% correct, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard them all. Every single one of those, believe it or not.
And there's more. I'm sure there's a longer list if I decided to look further.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
So you mentioned the word you mentioned something like nuance or something earlier, and something I've realized is that when you when you use AIs or when you read scientific papers today, you'll see there's nuance in this, and what I find is the term nuance is really designed, or it's a spectrum, it's a continuum.
Uh-huh.
This phraseology is really designed that to say that there's no right and there's no wrong. There's no right answer or wrong answer. There's no black and white anymore. It's just a spectrum of gray. So, it's not like we're wrong. It's just that it's a perspective. So it really
Right.
denies fact and evidence, and it denies logic. It denies contradiction. It denies right and wrong. It's really just a way to circumvent using language in a sophist manner. That is my
Yeah.
take on that.
Yeah, very true. I agree with that 100%. So I wasn't fully on board with all the NOI's tenants, but I took a large chunk of it. And so I couldn't become a member, obviously, although there is historical record because I did my master's thesis on Elijah Muhammad and his theology and the evolution of his view on whites. And that's called Can White People Be Saved? I don't even remember the subtitle. That was back in 2010. So that was a long time ago, but it was published in my library. And so, the idea is, although white people are devils by nature, if they accept the religion of Islam, they can sort of be civilized and be brothers in faith to the black Muslims, but still not brothers in humanity, because they're quite literally subhuman with weaker bones, weaker blood, smaller brains, and all this
That's
stuff. Yeah, it's really crazy. And the way that the white people were created was through a eugenics process where children that were lighter skinned that came out of the mother were killed, and then the mother was told, oh, this baby went to heaven. And so they were killing off the blacker babies, leaving the lighter ones alive, and eventually the gradation got so light that the white people came out of the lighter skinned blacks through this process of eugenics and killing babies.
That is a crazy. This is Elijah Muhammad here on the left, wearing the Shriner cap.
Among the oaths to the nation. Huh, that's an actual quote. Yeah, and the funny thing is, as far as I understand it, the Masonic secret is ultimately that man is his own God. Like, there is no other God but man. And again, this is Gnostic. This is knowledge. This is the ultimate illumination that you reach Godhood.
That's a very interesting point, because Islam. Let me bring it. You raised some very interesting points. A couple of things. You mentioned earlier consensus, or rather, you said Orthodox Islam, because I mentioned that to you before we went live.
Yep.
Obviously, there's always these disputes about lay people. Apologists for Islam will deny that there's such a thing as orthodoxy in Islam. They'll say there's as many Islams as there are Muslims. Like, no, there's many opinions as there are people. However, this doesn't make all opinions correct. If everyone is correct, then no one is correct, because then ISIS is Muslim, because you cannot claim on the basis of everyone is right that they are not right.
Right.
If everyone makes up Islam for themselves, then no one can say that the Taliban is not Muslim.
There's no magisterium.
Hamas.
So yeah.
Sorry?
There's no magisterium in Islam. So
however, there is. So they've got the sacred law, grammar, blah, blah, and they speak of scholarly consensus and non-consensus. So the scholarly consensus is called the Ijma, right? This is a book of the Sharia, right? This is a Sharia manual. This is the most popular Sharia manual. I'll just quickly go. So scholarly consensus, Ijma, the meaning of consensus. And notice, because Islam is a religion of law.
Right.
So scholarly consensus is legally binding, right? So because it's a religion of law, and there has to be a consensus for there to be consistency, otherwise you just have a free-for-all. Therefore, you have laws. So the sources of the law, the sources of Islam, like the Quran and the Hadith and so on, eventually you have these schools of jurisprudence, and they all have a consensus view. Now, they differ on minor points, but they agree on the essentials.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where scholarly consensus is legally binding. And this is how they work this within the Sharia. Ask those who know if you do not. By consensus of all scholars, ijma, right? This verse is an imperative for someone who does not know ruling in sacred law to follow someone who does, right? Virtually all scholars of fundamentals of Islamic law have made this verse their principal evidence. It is obligatory for the ordinary person to follow the scholar who is a mujtahid. Now, there are major mujtahids called the mujtahids mutlaq. These are the major scholars that founded the schools of jurisprudence. They are called absolute scholars. And these absolute scholars are the founders, like Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, and Shafi. And Shafi holds, I would say, preeminence amongst those. And so now you've got, let me see. And this is also based on tradition and the scholarly consensus, the ijma. So they speak of that. All mujtahids, okay, they agree on its ruling regardless of their country, race, or group. And non-mujtahids are of no consequence. So if Islam is a religion of law and it has a legal system to replace Western law with, we need to ask ourselves, what is this law? Where is it written? And well, here you're looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned to me in our initial conversation that you had a myriad of sources on Islamic law and rulings, and it's in a lot of this stuff. When I was Muslim, I wasn't really too concerned about. I wasn't concerned about the law aspect so much. But what happened was, like I said, I didn't become a member of the Nation of Islam. However, I did convert in 2006 to Sunni Orthodoxy. And the person responsible for bringing me in to the faith is now a famous Muslim author, worldwide speaker. I think he lives in the UAE or Dubai, Gabriel Al-Romani, or Jibril. So he's very, very famous. But at the time, he was a simple white Romanian convert from either Orthodoxy or Catholicism. And that's how I was brought up in the faith. And I eventually took my Shahada in 2006. And that's how that started for me. In 2008, I ran across something very interesting. The Nation of Islam came on my radar again, this time in the form of a Nation of Islam scholar who made it his life's work and still does to academically vindicate the theological teachings of the Nation of Islam, particularly on God and his nature, his being, and so forth. So his thesis from the University of Michigan was basically that the way God manifested himself in the Hebrew Bible in terms of anthropomorphic theophanies or appearing in the form of a man, while this is often denied by mainstream Muslims, is actually part and parcel of a tradition going back to Ahmed ibn Hanbal and his school. And he used a couple of hadith traditions that he favored, one being that Allah created Adam in his image, excuse me.
Mhm.
I think the Arabic is Khalaqallahu Adam ala suratihi. God created Adam in his image. And another hadith tradition that he kind of linked with that was the vision that Muhammad had of God, where he appeared as a shab, or young man between the age of 30 and 33 with long black hair and a green robe. And he put his palm on Muhammad between his shoulder blades, and he could feel the coolness of his palm. And so what the scholar's thesis is the way in which God manifested himself in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible was exactly the way that early Muslims saw God, but this has been kind of hidden or swept under the
Mhm.
rug, so nobody can figure it out now. So that was kind of a revelation for me, because now whereas before I just dismissed the Bible as being totally corrupt. I would only read bits of it that confirmed Islam, of course. Like when Jesus is called the Son of Man, that means he's just a man and not divine. And there's proof. Look at that, Christians. I would use the Bible in that kind of context. But now I'm starting to fall in love with the Bible because I'm reading more about those theophanies in the Old Testament, like Genesis 18, where Yahweh and his two messengers appear to Abraham. And, Isaiah 6, when the glory of the Lord fills the temple, he's seated on a throne. So I'm reading all this, and I now have a new appreciation and love, particularly for the Old Testament. Then in 2009, I met one of the scholar's friends whom I connected with over MySpace. This is how old I am. And we would talk about the scholar's works, his findings. We would have conversations on the reality of God as a glorified man and man as God. And, I said to him one day, I can't believe that the Christians think that Jesus is God. And then he dropped the bomb on me when he said, well, brother, the one who appeared to Muhammad in the form of a man, that was the divine Christ. And that right there shook my whole worldview, broke it down. I was on the floor in my bedroom, like in the fetal position, weeping because I've been denying Christ for so many years, and now I'm seeing Christ clearly in Islam. He's manifesting himself to me. Yeah, there's that hadith right there. Yeah.
This is the Encyclopedia of Islam.
Yeah, God created man in his image. Yep.
Now, this is really interesting. Dimit. I've always wondered about this word. This is something actually, you've just put me onto something that will fill in a piece in the puzzle for some of the early pagan / origins of Islam and the connections to West Africa. Because, the earliest inscription for the name of Yahweh is in just north of Ethiopia, south of Egypt. And that area used to be called Dimit, DMT, Dimit. And it had, at one point, it was pagan. It was invaded, taken over by the Yemenis, and then ultimately it has a connection to Islam. But I always wondered, and Dimit means the likeness of Adam to God. That's very interesting. So there's a Hebrew influence there, historically. That's very interesting. Thanks for that. Yeah, sorry, go on. You just clued me into something. I need to.
Yeah, no problem, brother. Glad to help.
Yeah.
So yeah, I now have somebody who's introducing me to Christ through the back door of Islam in a very innovative way. So it now shaped not only the way that I viewed and understood Islam. So basically, my thesis or my position was Islam and Muslims have been misunderstanding their own tradition for 1400 years. But here I come, and I'm going to show people the real truth that, according to the Quran, which confirms the New Testament and the entire Bible, Christ died for our sins. He rose from the dead. God is a Trinity. And this is all supported in the Quran, but Muslims just don't understand. So there's that, again, that Gnostic idea, right? I have this mission, I have this unique perspective, and I have to share it with everybody. So there's that theme popping up again in my journey. But you know what? That's kind of a side issue, because the main takeaway here at this point in my life was Jesus was real to me. So now I'm starting to read Protestant authors and watch Protestant authors, listen to them, Chuck Swindoll, Charles Stanley, guys like that, just mainstream evangelical kind of guys, right? But the love of Christ just came into my heart, and I realized that I was a sinner. I needed a savior, and he came for me. So for the first time in my life, even though it was within the context of Islam in a very weird way, Christ came to me and changed my life and gave me like new joy. And it started to influence the way I practice Islam, because now I'm getting into the New Testament and I'm listening to other Protestants talking about being free in Christ. And free in Christ in Protestantism means you're basically free from organized religion. You just have this living, breathing, spontaneous relationship with the Trinity, and the Holy Spirit's in your soul. You can pray extemporaneously. You don't have to do repeated prayers. You don't have to do rituals, but you could just walk with God in ultimate freedom. And so this began to change the way I practice Islam. For a while, I kept the Salat. I fasted Ramadan still. Then I kind of gave that up, and I said, all that's internal. I can do that internally. I don't need to externally express it anymore. Now I'm placing more of an importance on sort of living out my faith in a Protestant way, but I'm still affirming the Quran as scripture and Muhammad as the final warner or prophet to mankind. But that didn't last too long, because it was, funny enough, it was the issue of communion that made me drop this perspective. So at the time, I had a purely symbolic view of communion as a Protestant, of course. But there was the idea that obviously, you're consuming wine. So I thought, okay, well, in Islam, consuming alcohol could lead one to hellfire. It's a serious sin. So if I actually do what Christ
commanded, in paradise, the rivers flow with wine, and you can have all the wine you like. And fornication is a serious sin which can get you killed on earth, but in paradise, in front of Allah, you can knock yourself out.
That's right.
Makes it kind of weird. It's not good here on earth where Allah, doesn't come, but in front of him, it's all good. I find that a little strange myself.
Yeah, that is very strange, brother. Very strange.
Just a point here: Allah created Adam in his image, 60 cubits, about 30 meters in height. So now this to me is interesting. According to Sahih Bukhari, Da'if Bukhari. I need to rephrase that. Da'if Bukhari, for the simple reason that whenever we bring up the Sahih, the Muslims explain to us that these are actually weak hadiths.
Yeah.
So da'if, Da'if Bukhari. And also I want you to notice that what you have is, in Islam, Adam is 30 meters tall. Now he's supposed to be potentially buried, according to some traditions. He's buried here. Now Ishmael and his mother are buried here in the Hatam. If you have a look here, the Hatam is this semicircular shape here. So Ishmael and his mother are buried here, which is within 3 meters of the Kaaba, and Adam is buried somewhere in this region around, and within 10 meters or 20 meters of next to the Zamzam wall, within 20 meters of the Kaaba. So I'm just thinking, if we had a 30-meter skeleton, and we have 300 prophets buried here, and Ishmael and his mother buried right here, I would love to see the archaeological evidence for that. Well, I would just like to see a radar plot of this.
Yeah, it's funny, the black cube and its height now. According to the Nation of Islam's deeper esoteric theology, this Kaaba, this black box structure, is actually indicative or symbolic of the black man as the house of God, and inside the house dwells the Spirit of God, and the black man is the outer shell. And then everybody's worshiping around him or worshiping him. So this kind of fits the Nation of Islam's theology in a weird way.
Well, sure. I mean, they'll use it, but notice one thing though: men wear white, women wear black. Okay, you'll often find that women wear their kanduras, they have little braid and things on them, right? Which is interesting because the Kaaba is decorated in black. If Allah is male, he's wearing female colors.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is very
Yeah. So if
interesting.
you go into the text of the Sufis, and of course here Muslims are going to start disputing the authenticity of the Sufis, but you'll find that the Sufis claim that Allah has an outer nature and an inner nature, a secret inner nature, and Allah's secret inner nature is female.
Well, yeah, Rahman, right? Mercy. Look at the root Rahma or Raham or whatever. It means womb. So you could see how that female sort of identity or slant could be folded in there somehow, even from
Yeah.
a word.
Yes. So in fact, uh, Blackstone, if you look here, I mean, this has often come up by people as a representation of, let's just say, a little feminine.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
This has come up like that. So just to mention that. I hope we're not getting sidetracked, but you're just bringing up things that I think are worth discussing. It just makes my brain think about certain things. Because a 30-meter Adam was he the only 30-meter tall person? Where are the skeletons? Where's the evidence
Right.
archaeologically of
Right.
30-meter tall people
And
in prehistory?
that's actually a rabbinic tradition as well. That Adam was a certain height, made in God's image. So you see the interplay between rabbinic Judaism and Islam, which, if you look at it, Sunni Islam is basically an Arab form of rabbinic Judaism. When you get down to the brass tacks, they're really cousins to
Yeah,
each other.
there's some truth to that. Yes, certainly. Although you can it's got certain it has certain overlap with Christianity, but when you look at the text of the Quran and the other Islamic sources, they reference apocryphal stories, they reference children tales, they reference
Right.
Gnostic stories. I mean, it's really just they verbatim lift Gnostic stories from Gnostic gospels, and it's right in the Quran, it's right in the Hadiths and others. It's like this is not Orthodox Christianity, and also there are pagan references for that predate Islam.
That's right.
So there's all of these influences, but certainly yes, there's an also a heterodox Judaic influence as well.
Definitely. What was I going to say? You just put a light on in my head. Now I think I'm losing my train of thought here. Um, so, anyways, I was mentioning the issue of communion. So, if I
Yeah.
do at this point in my life, I'm thinking, if I do what Jesus commanded and drink wine as part of the Last Supper, I'm committing a major sin in Islam. So, in obeying Jesus, I could actually go to hell. And I'm on fire for Christ at this point in my life. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm at a crossroads. Who do I listen to? Do I listen to God incarnate, who tells me to celebrate the Last Supper, and Paul says this will be done in perpetuity until the Perusia? Or do I listen to a so-called prophet who came hundreds of years later saying, no, this is obsolete, and if you actually do what Jesus commanded you to do, you'd be gravely sinning and possibly go to hell? Well, once I framed it like that, I said, I can't do
Mhm.
this Islam thing anymore. And
Right.
so communion, even though, and I now look back and see the humor of God, right? It was the issue of communion that made me
Hmm.
break away from Islam, of all things,
So
right?
really, see, also it's parousia. It's a Greek word, the parousia. Um, yeah, but that's a really interesting story. That so Jesus is what took you away from Islam.
Right. It wasn't Muhammad's character. It wasn't the jihad. It wasn't the Sharia. It wasn't the execution of apostates. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't even Aisha.
Yeah,
I bought
because
into. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, brother. Go ahead.
no, please go on. You bought into.
Uh, I was of I was of the opinion, because this is what I was told. Well, Aisha hit puberty, so Muhammad didn't do anything, too out of the ordinary for his time. So that didn't really bother me until I went to the sources, and it actually says when Muhammad took Aisha to his house, she was playing with dolls. So therefore she was under the age of accountability, and they consummated the marriage. So when I found, and even the fact that, in I think it's Surah 65, where it talks about the waiting period for divorce, it talks about those who have not yet had their menstruation. So that's a minor, right? I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, but I found this out much later. It just disturbed me all the more. But those weren't concerns of mine at the time. It was strictly, who is Jesus and what did he do for us? What did he win for us on the cross? That was really the crux of everything for me. That's why I left Islam, because of Jesus.
Yeah, this is the Sharia. This is a woman's post-marital. This is post-marital waiting period. And this is the Sharia on Quran 65:4, the waiting period for woman who does not menstruate, whether prepubescent,
there it is
3 months. And this is post-marital.
Yeah, not premarital, postmarital.
Yeah. I'll get one other reference up. So a person is not considered to have the capacity to remain virginal if he or she is prepubescent at the time of marital intercourse.
Oh my Lord. I've never even seen that. That's just, ooh,
plenty. We could do 2 hours on just this.
Lord have mercy. Oh my goodness. That's awful. Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that it went further into detail like that, but my goodness.
Oh no, it does. It does.
Probably
Let me
even
actually
more.
find you an infant. Okay, so infant is defined in Islam as in the cradle. An infant is in the cradle, right? That's how Islam defines it. So let's have a look here. Let's look at this law. These are things that a husband should not do. This is law in terms of charging one's wife with adultery. So this is on the section called N11, divorce, charging your wife with adultery. And where it is not appropriate for a husband to charge his wife with adultery, just read that for me, if you will.
A husband who accuses his wife of adultery is
Let me just
disciplined,
take through.
or
Yeah.
the starting from 11:2.
Yeah, this
The top? Okay. A husband who accuses his wife of adultery is disciplined by the magistrate and not allowed to imprecate against her when her adultery is already legally established, whether by her own admission or by proof, meaning that 4 upright witnesses have looked at her when she was copulating and seen the adulterer's, penis in her vagina. Wow, what? When the person is accused as a mere infant, you gotta be kidding me.
This is Allah's law. This is the law. This is the official Sharia. This is
oh my goodness.
A husband who accuses his wife of adultery is disciplined when adultery is impossible, such as when the woman accused is a mere infant. This is the law. This is the Sharia. This is Muslim law. This is eternal Sharia. I can go through plenty like this.
Yeah, if I had encountered this earlier before I took my Shahada, that would never have happened, obviously. That I wouldn't even have given it a second thought. How could this be from God, right? But yeah, I found out about this stuff later, but I didn't know it went into such gruesome detail. That's awful.
Oh no, it gets very dark and very dirty. And I find that Muslims obviously don't want to discuss this with me. It's too embarrassing. The Sharia is too explicit. It's not as ambiguous as, well, why don't you want to read the Quran? Because anyone can interpret it. But if you go to the Sharia, it's in your face. There is no hiding from it.
Yeah. I mean, those few examples, they're crystal clear, right? What the rules are, what the interpretations are.
Yeah. So you went to Calvinism afterwards. I don't want to dwell on that too long, but yeah, I could really. It's disturbing. It's very disturbing to read those references, and I can go through multiple Sharia manuals on that. So you fell into Calvinism. Can you tell us about how that happened?
Yeah. So I started listening to guys like Paul Washer. If anyone wants to see this video, just type in YouTube Paul Washer Jesus Save Me. It's about 3 minutes long. the emotion in his voice, the way he told his 3-minute testimony.
Paul Washer. Oh man, I've listened
Yes.
to Paul Washer. I'm sorry, but that guy lies through his teeth.
I just that's what I was like. That was like my guru. That guy. I swallowed up all his material. I listened to like all his talks. He was like my guy. That Paul Washer and John MacArthur, Tim Conway, guys like that. I really what
Right.
drew me to Calvinism was, again, that idea that it's nothing that I've done, but I've been chosen. I'm one of the chosen ones, just like I felt when I was into the Black Hebrew Israelites, into the Nation of Islam. I had this privileged position, and now I could be one of the elect, right? So there's that Gnosticism, that Gnostic element again, and pride, of course, and pride.
Mhm.
Wouldn't have admitted it at the time. I would have said, I'm less than dog crap on the bottom of someone's shoes. I'm a worm. I hate myself, blah, blah, blah.
But do you understand that when you read Calvin's actual writings and Luther's writings on what's the term they use for it? The depravity of man.
Yeah,
They have, you are dog poo. You are less than a worm.
that's right. That's
You're
right.
you're not a whale in the ocean. You're the whale poop at the bottom of the ocean.
Yep.
I mean, this is quite literally how they describe you. That, in fact, Luther's writings, Luther inspired Calvin. And I think few people realize there's a very strong parallel between Luther and Calvin. They had the same views in terms of predestination. They had the same views on the depravity of man. But Luther writes that nothing that a human does is pleasing to God. Everything you do is an abomination in God's eyes. No thought that you have, no act that you do, no intention that you possess is less than evil, disgusting, abhorrent, filthy, and abomination to God, which is a very dark, incredibly negative view of life.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what I held. The only thing, so basically when we get saved, God looks at us and he doesn't see us. He only sees the righteousness of Christ. So therefore we can only be perfect. We can only persevere until the end, because he's not looking at us. He's looking at his son. So
but then God's just like a sheet, that Jesus is like a sheet that you cover.
Right.
So it's like snow on a pile of manure.
Which is
God
what
sees the
Luther
snow,
said.
but then
Yeah.
God doesn't. I thought God can see through things, but fine. Doesn't change us then. Isn't that
No.
crazy theology? I mean, isn't there a flaw in that theology that we're supposed to be saved and cleansed through salvation and through the sacraments, rather than just being, like sauce over a dunghill?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very deficient and very twisted. But I think the reason I gravitated so heavily to Calvinism was, in particular, the doctrine of total depravity, which we're discussing obviously now. I've always been a very introverted, sort of drawn to in depressive states, bad moods, funks, whatever. I already had a low opinion of myself, having a disability, having cerebral palsy, never feeling like I could measure up, always feeling worthless, no good. So this idea resonated with me already, because that's what I already felt about myself. And years later I would discover that, I have bipolar, I have all these, I have quite a few mental illnesses actually, in addition to cerebral palsy. And it just goes to show you, it doesn't matter how broken you are, Jesus can still save you. He still loves you. So I think that's why I gravitated so heavily towards Calvinism, is because I was already depressed and I already had a low opinion of myself and probably others. Right. And oh my gosh, here's this theology where I don't have to do anything. God just looks at me and sees perfection. I can rest. But then how do I know if I'm one of the elect? Am I producing fruit that's evidence of my repentance?
If you don't have to do anything, why would you need to produce fruit? Because I've read Martin Luther's theology. I covered it. I did 2 episodes this week, and Luther contradicts himself on everything. He has no systematic theology. He'll say something on Monday, but something opposite on Tuesday. And Luther states that you don't even have to do the 10 Commandments. He says the 10 Commandments are worthless. Now, of course, in his catechism, he's got, no, you have to follow the 10 Commandments. But he says, and then later he says, well, actually, just the first 3 commandments, you can ignore the rest. And then he says later, but if we are justified by faith alone, then works, who needs the 10 Commandments? The 10 Commandments are not even good commandments. They're not even necessary. So Luther has multiple takes on it. So whatever day you happen to be on, you can pick something that suits your mood. of the day, but which is like like Islam. It's got contradictory statements, and you can pick the one that sounds good on the day.
Yeah, exactly.
But your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I went to a Presbyterian I went to a Presbyterian church. I've been going there since I was Muslim. And my parents made me, because I lived at home, and they said, one of the rules of the house is, if you're going to do this Muslim thing, then you got to come to church with us on Sunday. So I would go there, and I would put my fingers in my ears and stuff like that when they would mention the Trinity or the divinity of Christ, and I would just say astaghfirullah, and all that, right? So I was going to that church for years, but now, being on fire for Christ, I was like volunteering. I was leading small study groups and all that. So what I did is I actually tried to convert people to Calvinism in these small study groups. I would show them Paul Washer videos and lectures, and try to teach them total depravity and limited atonement and all this stuff. So I was like kind of undercover at my church, trying to recruit people for my version of Calvinism, because the church itself, although it was Presbyterian, wasn't Orthodox enough for me. It wasn't Calvinist enough for me, because I never heard the distinctives of tulip preached from the pulpit. So I thought, I got to do something about this, and I got to work with, from the inside. It's kind of like a mole, and pull people into the truth. So again, there's that Gnosticism, that pride, that being chosen. I feel chosen and blessed being a Catholic, but it's not, oh, I have this neat little perspective that I have to convince the world of. It's, I'm a part of this one big messy family, and we're all the same. We're all drudging it through it together, and we're all in this together. And I'm no different than anybody else, except for God showed his grace to me. And I don't have to have these like weird ideas and create my own theology, my own interpretation of scripture, and just have an overinflated or deflated view of myself. I can just rest in who I am. God made me. He fearfully and wonderfully made me who I am. And I'm a temple of the Holy Spirit. I'm a child of God, and I can rest in that now. And I'm just the same as anybody else. So,
but just curious then, you're a temple of the child of God. However, you actually are not cleansed. You're just covered by Jesus, who just like I said, snow over a dunghill, and the dung is still there, and you're a temple, but you're still this evil, abominable, uncleansed, disgusting abomination to God. Isn't there a contradiction there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely contradictory. And the thing is, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, but yet Calvinists love to say how much God hates sinners. He looks at you and he hates you when, before you're regenerated. He hates
the discussion
the
of babies in Calvinism shocked me one day. I was listening to Vodi Boucham, and there were a couple of others. R.C. Sproul was there, and they talk about a baby is a viper in a diaper, that babies are an abomination in the sight of God. Babies are actually filled with original sin and evil, and babies are actually disgusting. And I was like, that is a really dark view.
That's mental illness. I mean, if you believe that, I mean, I understand they feel theologically committed to that, but my goodness. Like,
no, but this is in Calvin's writings. I've covered this before. I've gone through. I need to go back into Calvin's writings. I did 4 parts on Calvin, 2 episodes. I did two series on Calvin, 4 episodes on Calvin's theology, which is very Gnostic. I need to go into more depth, but this is what's covered in Calvin's writings. It's in Luther's writings, and Calvin takes it from Luther, and then he enhances that. But his view of there's no innocence in babies. There is just evil. It's shocking to me. It's negative. It may as well be Marxism. I mean, it's just horrible.
What did Paul Washer say? He gave this sort of scenario regarding a baby or a toddler. He said, here's an evidence of, and by the way, I don't deny original sin, of course, but he was speaking on, the Calvinist version of original sin. And he said, this baby is crying and he sees your watch and he wants your watch and he's trying to grasp at it, but he can't quite do it. And he can't mouth the words. He can't express to you what he wants to do, but he's so angry that he can't get this watch. But if that baby was 18 years old, he would beat you to a bloody pulp. So stuff like that. I mean, gee, many crickets. Just terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrible.
No. But also, there's this survey. I don't know if you know, there's a survey that the Ligonier Ministry puts out every 2 years. They run a survey of evangelicals in America, and something like, I'll get the figures wrong, but there were two figures from the stats that really stood out. Was that 63% of American evangelicals do not believe that God was a created being, and something like 36% do not believe that Jesus is God.
Huh.
And that's American evangelicals. So a third of American evangelicals do not believe that Jesus was God, and over 60% believe that he was a created being. But either way, or something like that, but either way, if he's a created being, then he's not God anyway. Then that means 60% plus of American Protestants do not believe Jesus is God.
Yeah. You know what? The way things are going in the culture, I'm very disappointed to hear those figures, but I'm not entirely shocked. Lloyd, I do have to get going in about 20 minutes.
Apologies. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So
we can do a part 2 though. Don't worry. If you want to have me back
that would
on.
be great. I'd love to. The conversation is less of a monologue with you describing. Well, let me tell you my story about how I got from A to B. It's more of an exploration of different ideas, and which surprised me. And I wasn't. I hope it's a good format. I hope it's interesting to you as well.
I love it. No, this is the gist of my podcast is conversation. I like having conversations, even when I do interviews. It's not necessarily a formal, oh, we're going to follow this format and here's a list of questions. I just kind of go with the flow and let it grow organically and naturally. Of course, there's some guiding questions, but I like this format. This is what I do. Antimatter, yeah.
Yeah, true that, which is Gnostic in a real sense, Gnostic, and it's not even different to the way that Marx viewed life. Once you get into Marx's crazy views, I was discussing with someone yesterday, yesterday, in fact, that when you look at Marx's early history, Marx actually wrote poetry to Satan, and Marx, in his poem, says that he gave his soul to Satan, that he sold his soul to Satan, and that Marx actually was following Satan's drum. He was marching to the beat of Satan's drum, doing Satan's work. And so yet you've got the supposed atheist who doesn't believe in religion.
Yeah.
You understand? So you find it's satanic at the end of the day. At that core, that's what you have.
Wow. I thought he was purely a materialist, an atheist. I had no idea.
There's always the bits they forget to tell you in the history books, and that's what I do on my channel. I go and dig deeper, and you start reading Marx's poetry, and you're like, this is satanic. This is without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. He says it. I mean, he literally says it. You're like, okay, well, so you were brought up as a Catholic. You were baptized as a Catholic. Here's a question. So before we just discuss briefly how you returned to the Catholic Church and why, because there's so much to discuss. I mean, when we had our offline discussion previously, there were so many things to discuss about that. There's so many about breakaway groups in the Catholic Church and Catholic doctrine and and I mean, that's something I'd love to discuss, but just what you've brought up so far. But do you think that this journey you went on was somehow, I mean, were you disobedient to God, let's say, or do you think that this was a journey you were allowed to go on because it actually gave you knowledge and information and experience that you could apply and to help others?
Definitely the latter. I mean, to go through the rabbit holes that I've been through and the paths I've been down, they're so strange, but I know that there's people that are maybe in those positions. Maybe I could reach somebody who's in the Nation of Islam that another Catholic wouldn't even listen to, or he wouldn't listen to another Catholic or whatever. Just like the brother who introduced me to Jesus as a Muslim, having that Christocentric version of Islam, maybe I wouldn't have listened to a pastor or a preacher, but I listened to him because he was where I was at the time. So I think there's a golden thread in my journey, and it started and ended with Christ, or I shouldn't say ended. It's going to go on ad infinitum with Christ, God willing. But the seeds of my baptism just flowered as time went by, and just grew into a beautiful tree, which is the end result that I'm at now. But definitely, and people have said, your story touched me. So I do think that it's very providential, and God was guiding me the whole way, but he just led me in baby steps and made me go down some weird detours, tripped and fell on my knees a few times, but he pulled me back up and brought me back home, and I couldn't be happier. It's if I had to do this 1,000 times over again, I certainly would.
What perspective, what special perspective based on your hard-fought, hard-won experience, what is this? How does it help you then to help others, or to deal with these questions? I mean, what do you think? Maybe I'm not phrasing the question really well. It might seem like a repeat of the previous question, but I think it does, in a real sense, set you apart, because you're the one guy with this particular experience. And what is superior about Catholicism for you? What about it is more coherent versus the rest?
Well, like I said, I got into temple theology. That was really big for me, and it really helped me see in the beginning how Jesus truly is the Lord. He is Yahweh incarnate. The first Christians did indeed believe this. This isn't an invention of the arch heretic Paul, who mixed Greco-Roman paganism with a simple Semitic religion and all that stuff, right? No,
Yeah.
this is Hebrew Israelite religion through and through, and this is coming from the Jerusalem temple, and this is why the Christians picked up on it right away. It wasn't foreign to them. So really, temple theology, and you could say that as a Protestant as well. I mean, but then I started looking at the structure of the early church and the way the church worshipped, and I'm like, this is temple worship. The bread of the presence, being consumed by the priest, and now we're all priest, prophet, and king in Christ. It makes you holy. It changes you from the inside out. You're not just covered over, but you're actually sanctified progressively. So, and the Melchizedek priesthood. I mean, what and Islam claims to be the Deen or Millat of Ibrahim, right? Of Abraham. Well, what's the religion of Abraham? Something that Muslims leave out is Melchizedek, because
No,
Melchizedek.
hold on a sec. We have to clarify that statement. I have to qualify that for you. When you go through the Muslim sources, Muslims claim that Islam is the religion of Abraham before he became a Jew.
Right, exactly.
So they reject Judaism, they reject Christianity, they reject Yahwism effectively, and they claim that they are following the Deen, the religion of Abraham. And Deen is it's a legal word. It's a very specific word. So we have to also qualify the word Deen, which I won't do right now. But a Deen, short version, is a political system like Marxism or Nazism or fascism. Deen is a political term. It is not a religion. It has an optional component as the 10th element within it. But it is first and foremost it's a totalitarian political system, totalitarian political system. But in terms of that's when you look through the definitions of the word deen within the major Islamic dictionaries. But then, so according to the Jewish sources, Abraham was a Sabaean before he became a Yahwist, right? Which just means following Yahweh. So the Sabaeans were Babylonian moon worshippers, but they were the Yemeni, shall we say, a Yemeni version of that Babylonian moon worship. So it was an Arabized version, a Yemenized version of Babylonian moon worship. So they worshipped the moon god Al-Makkah. So that was the religion of Abraham. So he was a moon worshipper. So if the Muslims are claiming that they follow Abraham's religion prior, that means that they are then Babylonian moon worshippers, which is pagans, which is why they have the crescent and the star, because that was the symbol in prehistoric times of that religion.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going by, the mainstream apologetic sort of idea behind Abraham being a Muslim and Islam being the religion of Abraham, they conveniently leave out the figure of Melchizedek, right? Melchizedek meeting Abraham, and what's the sacrifice made? Bread and wine. And you see that Jesus institutes that at the Last Supper, makes his apostles priests to perpetuate that sacrifice, the fulfillment of Malachi 1. All this stuff just started to click for me. Marian veneration, like the Gebirah, the great lady in the court of Jerusalem, being an intercessor before the king, sitting beside the king. All this stuff made perfect sense. And it just clicked for me. And then reading the fathers, reading the ecumenical councils, just
So for the audience, would you say then that Christianity, let's be specific, Catholic Christianity, is a continuation of the tradition of the Judaic theology? So from the time of the Old Testament, this connects us into the New Testament, and it's continuation of this what's the word here? These practices or this culture, or I don't have the right word, but it's really a continuation of the flow from the Jewish priesthood continuing into the practices of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. And when people when sometimes when people hear the phrase the Jewish roots of the Catholic Church, they might be tempted to think of rabbinic Judaism, but we're talking about the religion of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the temple in Jerusalem, all that. So we're talking about the most ancient strand of Israelite religion and worship. I would say that's fully fulfilled in the Catholic Church. And even something like the Petrine ministry, we find, Matthew 16, the commissioning of Peter, we see that harkens back to Isaiah 22 and Eliakim and Shebna having an office where one is vested with a turban and has care over the sacred vessels in the temple, holds the key of David on his shoulder to open and shut. These people are guarding the temple in the absence of the Davidic king. So all this stuff just it fits.
Right.
I would say Orthodoxy obviously is our sister church, and I don't take anything away from them, but they're missing that universal Petrine succession, which is also rooted in the Jerusalem temple. So I would say it has everything in its complete form.
Right. Although, this leads me to a couple of things. One, I get comments from people who are Orthodox, the various different strains of them. Take your pick. But I find that they all claim that they are the original church, and the Catholic Church came along in 1921 with big sticks, beat everyone up, then rewrote the history books, and they then denied that the Orthodox were the original Christians. And in fact, the Orthodox Church was Christian since 4000 BC. And I might be exaggerating slightly, just slightly, I assure you. And it really annoys me. And then I had a Coptic on recently who was making the most outrageous claims. And whenever I examine these claims, they are very superficial. But once you look into them, they have no real substance. They are, once you look at them, they'll say they make claims about the Pope. They make claims about history. And I'm really skeptical of so many of these historical claims by the Orthodox Church. And I agree with your point. But the other point I want to raise, and I'll let you carry on, is Luther and the Reformers removed the Deuterocanon, what they call the Apocrypha, for the simple reason, they renamed the Deuterocanon Apocrypha as an insult to diminish it, to demean them, to give them license to remove them, because this created a gap. It creates a 500-year gap, the intertestamental gap, which removes the Judaism from Christianity, the link. So therefore, they could deny a Jewish link. And this has been exploited by various heretics throughout the centuries. Whereas if you add the Deuterocanon back in, there's a much smaller gap, and you start to see that link from the Old into the New Testament, because you can see the practices continue. And there seems to be a deliberate effort to want to de-Judaize, remove the Jewish roots of Christian tradition.
Yeah, meanwhile they're Jewish through and through. I mean, I think it was Clement of Rome that said, the bishop, priest, and deacon is the high priest, priests, and Levites. So I mean, the Christians, simply put, inherited temple tradition. That's the long and short of it, and they carried it on and continue it today. I mean, the church is the new temple. Basically, it is the third temple. The Catholic Church is the third temple. We're not looking for, this rebuilt temple in Jerusalem with the red heifers and offering sacrifices of goats and rams. No. We're not doing that anymore. The Catholic Church is heaven on earth. It is, it's the true temple. It's the temple of Ezekiel. I mean, we have we have the rivers running of flowing water from the side of the temple. Jesus gave us water from his side through which we enter the church, via baptism. Blood also flowed from his side, from which we get the Eucharist. I mean, there's just so much depth and richness, and it is Jewish through and through. I mean, if anybody wants to know more, they can check out my channel. I have lots of videos. I have videos with John Bergsma, Dr. Brant Petrie, Scott Hahn, where we explore a lot of these themes as well. So, I mean, if you want that old time religion, as people say, and you want that true Hebrew roots Christianity, don't look for LARPers. Don't go to Messianic Judaism. Don't go to the Black Hebrew Israelites. Come to the Catholic Church, where we have everything restored and fulfilled, that eternal covenant, that Melchizedek priesthood, that sacrifice of bread and wine, apostolic succession, Petrine ministry, going back to Isaiah 22. It's all ancient and it's all beautiful, and it's still here 2,000 years later, and the devil hasn't been able to eradicate it, and nor will he.
Yeah. You know what I found interesting? I did a show with Mal, an Irish Catholic, on my channel some time back on claims of apostolic succession from the 16th to the 18th century. Well, we actually went into the 19th century by apostolic churches. And in every single case, the apostolic churches, obviously Luther wanted to reject Catholic things, and then he wanted to create his own sort of history, because look, he couldn't do the Catholic thing, right? He had to reject that.
Mm-hmm.
So every single Protestant denomination from the 16th century onwards made claim to apostolic succession, but because they wouldn't use the Catholic claims because they didn't want to be Catholic, every single one of them makes claim through multiple heresies. And we're talking known heresies. We're talking flaming heretics, not even slightly ambiguous heretics. We're talking obvious, Gnostic, insane, crazy heretics, which for me was a massive eye-opener to see that the Anglican Church, you name them, every single one says, those Gnostic heretics, those insane whack job heretics, those were original Christians, and we trace our historical roots all the way back to Jesus, and the apostles through those guys. You're like, are you out of your mind?
Exactly what the Gnostics said, right? We got our tradition, our secret tradition, from the apostles. The mainstream church has lost it, and so you have that in Protestantism, right, with the great apostasy. You have that in Mormonism. You have that in Islam, where the original church, believed Jesus was, just a man, and here comes the big bad Catholic Church is going to wipe that out and create some pagan, Greco-Roman, Semitic, mishmash of religion and corrupt everything, and Paul was an arch heretic and all this garbage. So,
and the Muslims tell the same thing. Their stories on Paul are crazy. They can, in fact, the Muslim scholars claim that Paul was Paul of Samosata, which is like the 4th century. They claim that he was at the same time as the Nestorians, which is like the 5th century. They claim that Saint Paul was the son of Constantine. You're like, no, literally they do. I did that in my series Polemics. So Muslim scholars had no idea, and they've made up the most ridiculous stories about Paul. They don't talk about that because it's embarrassing. But yeah, you said you have to wind down in a minute. When shall we do this again?
Brother, whenever you're free. It seems like weekends are probably the best for us, given the time difference. But
yes,
I'm happy to come on whenever you'll have me. This is a blessing. It lifted my spirits. I'm feeling good. I feel blessed, and I'm happy to talk with you. And I hope that people benefited from this episode, and future ones, God willing, that we'll be able to do.
This was a very interesting conversation. It allowed me to also discuss some of the things that I research on the channel, and use that as parallels to what you were saying, or to reinforce things that you said. And I mean, your knowledge of these topics are unique. Your understanding of Islam is really good. Your knowledge of temple theology is fantastic. Your history is very sound. So yeah, thank you. So let's hope we can do this next weekend. Are you free on a Sunday to do this? Because next weekend, Saturday, I don't think I'm available, but Sunday.
I will check my calendar. I think it should be okay. Maybe after church, kind of my time, obviously. But I'll be in touch and check my calendar and see what's going on.
Yeah, let's see. Otherwise, the next 2 weekends, I'm kind of busy, but we'll definitely make some time. But thank you for the time. It's been really, really enlightening, really stimulating conversation. And there's so much more to discuss as well. I mean, the history, really, Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah,
Thank you,
guys.
Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you to the audience for your time. And if you have any additional comments, please drop them in the chat. I will take those up with Dustin on our next discussion. And yeah, thank you. Very honored. And thanks, guys. We'll see you soon. God bless.
God bless.